Welcome, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle, and Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books. Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. And normally, we come to you live from Decatur, Georgia, right across the street from Agnes Scott College. But I am coming to you live from Atlanta, and my stars tonight are coming to you from the Northeast. We're very glad to have you both here tonight. I'm going to introduce our interviewer first. Andrea Lawler is one of my favorite folks. Andrea teaches writing at Mount Holyoke College and is the recipient of a 2020 Whitting Award for fiction and has been awarded fellowships by Lambda Literary and Radar Labs. Their publications include a chapbook, position papers, and a novel, Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl, which was a 2018 finalist for the Lambda Literary and CLMP Firecracker Awards. Paul, originally published by Rescue Press in 2017, is out now from Vintage Knopf and Picador in the UK and Ireland. And I asked Andrea to be here because Andrea is not only just a brilliant person, but also I feel like is a queer humorist at heart. And so I wanted them to be the interlocutor for this book evening to celebrate Emily M. Danforth's new adult novel. So Emily's debut novel was The Miseducation of Cameron Post, which so many people fell in love with and was so. We still meet teens who are like, that book helped me come out, that book saved my life. So that came out in 2012 and was named to numerous best book lists, was translated into half a dozen languages, and was adapted into a Sundance award-winning feature film of the same name. Plain Bad Heroines is Emily's debut adult novel. Emily has an MFA in fiction from the University of Montana and a PhD in English and creative writing from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. She lives in Rhode Island with her wife, Erica, her mother, Sylvia, and two of the most spoiled dogs on the planet, Kevin and Sally O'Malley. I read this book over the summer, sitting in my pool, like frying okra and chicken, and like nice. This book got me through the rough part of quarantine, and I just fell in love with it in a way that I have not fallen in love with a book in quite some time. And I wrote to Emily's publicist and I was like, look, I need you to schedule this at Charis Stat, because it is like the Venn diagram of things that I like. It's just right here, like it's just stacked up, and you could not have tailor-made a better book for me personally, but I suspect that I'm not alone in that. I actually think that probably this Venn diagram is something that many queer people share. So if you are tuning in tonight and you are new to this book, if it's because I've been harassing you online and telling you this is hilarious and delightfully creepy, I'm thrilled you're here. And you're going to want to go home with this book. So you can click that teal button at any time to buy Plain Bad Heroines from Charis. Just below that, you can click that Ask a Question button and obviously ask a question at any time. If you see a question that is similar to a question that you want to ask, you can just upvote that question. So please don't be redundant. You can also introduce yourself in the chat, say where you're watching from, talk about your favorite horror books, your favorite gothic romances, sapphic romances, any of the above. But yeah, we're glad that y'all are here. So excited to be celebrating this book. So Andrea and Emily, I'm gonna let y'all take it away. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's so awesome to get to be here with you, Emily.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you.
I've been an enormous fan of your book, your first book, Miseducation, for so many years since it came out, and ER's right. To this day, I have students talking to me about how much they love that book, and I thought, well, that's going to be impossible to follow up. I really did, and then I got my hands on this book thanks to ER, who asked me to join you, and because he knows what I love, and I have to just echo what he said. I can't remember the last time I enjoyed a book. Just pure pleasure, just like could not put it down. And
Thank you.
I know it's so fun to be here with you.
Thank you.
And I'm excited to hear you read.
I'm excited. I'm first of all just so glad to be here with you and ER. And I know that we said we were going to do a bunch of fanning, but I love Paul Takes the Form of a
Stop.
I do. And I also felt that way when I read it. I felt a lot like it was joyous and fun and funny, and I didn't want it to end. So I had a really similar feeling about your book. So I just want to say that at the beginning. I will read a little bit. First of all, thank you for showing up. I'm excited to talk about Playing Bad Heroines. It's been a minute. It took me a minute to write this book. You said you didn't know if I could, maybe follow it up, and I didn't know if I could write another book ever. So I'm really, really glad to get to talk about it. And I'm just going to read a tiny bit from the beginning for like 6 minutes, I think, and then we'll talk, and hopefully people have questions and see where things go. So the book is illustrated and it has footnotes, and that makes it a little bit tricky to figure out how to read. But I'm sure had the same problem with Paul, but I'm going to figure it out. So this is, it's called One Macabre Afternoon to Begin. It's a terrible story, and one way to tell it is this. 2 girls in love and a fog of wasps curse the place forever after. Maybe you think you already know this story because of the movie made of it. Not so, but you'll discover that soon enough. For now, let me acquaint you with Vespula maculifrons, the eastern yellow jacket. If you're imagining some do-gooder honeybee humming about the pastel pages of a children's book, don't. Eastern yellow jackets are aggressive when provoked, relentless when defending their underground home. They don't make honey, but might I offer you instead the desiccated insect paste they use to grow their masses. A given colony's workers are all stinging, sterile females who, in autumn, when they've been laid off from their busy work and can sense that the coming freeze will bring their deaths, just want to fly around, bored and gorging on carbs. But then, don't we all? Because they also feed on carrion, some people refer to them as meat bees. That's technically incorrect, but it sounds good. Most crucially for our purposes here, you should know that when they're in distress, yellow jackets release a pheromone to call on potentially thousands of their angry friends to help them come get you. In this case, the you was Clara Broward, and my God, was she ever in love with Florence Flo Hartshorn, and my God, did that fact ever upset Clara's wretched cousin Charles, who was just now chasing Clara through the thick woods surrounding the Brocante School for Girls. The air in those woods was weighted with the scent of fern rot and ocean tide, apple mash, and wet earth. And more than that, it was humming with the trill of yellow jackets. A few were probably already swirling around Clara like dust motes sprung from the beating of a rug. Their buzzing pitch threaded to her pulse as her messy steps propelled her toward a clearing and the black Oxford orchard, where apples felled in a recent storm now spoiled in the heat. And it was hot, the day humid and gray, one of those overripe summer days that sometimes lingers into fall. And waiting there in the orchard with those spoiling black apples, lulled beneath a tree with juice dripping down her chin, was Flo, the love of Clara's young life, a life about to end. 2 lives about to end. Careful, readers. We know that the year was 1902 and the state the tiniest in the nation, Rhode Island. We know that the Brocante's fall term had been in session for 6 weeks. And we know that Clara took off into that section of the woods onto the orchard path because several of her classmates watched her do it. She'd just been delivered back to campus after a weekend stay at her parents' house across the water in Newport, a house that they were then readying to close for the season. Cousin Charles had been the one tasked with driving Clara to campus. More than a few students had noted this because what he'd driven her in was still something of a loud and chugging novelty, even for the wealthy Brocante's population, a gas-powered automobile. And not just any automobile, but a Winton, same as the Vanderbilts, which is exactly why Charles had gone out and bought the damn thing, even along with the stupid driving goggles that went with it. And he was, of course, wearing them when they pulled through the Brocante's gate. And then as he slowed, he pushed them up, which smushed his hair back into a nest atop his horrible head. Maybe some of the girls had, in fact, later said that he looked rakish and fine. But for now, let's discount their certainly incorrect opinions. The important thing to note is that Charles and Clara were arguing as they arrived. And they continued to argue, the onlooker said, as he parked his loud contraption in the circle drive before Main Hall. They seemed to say their goodbyes very unhappily. Charles lunging from the car before gathering Clara's belongings only to dump them on the ground, all the while continuing to lecture her. Then he climbed back into the driver's seat and pouted there, his arms folded tight across his chest, his dumb face as bitter as a cranberry and nearly as red. But whatever the commands she'd just been given, Clara did not stoop to gather her things and go inside her dormitory, as one might have expected of her, as it seems Charles was expecting of her. Instead, she left the pile of clothing in cases and walked a few yards to a cluster of her gape-mouthed fellow students. She then asked where she could find Flo. Several of those students, including a third year, Eleanor Faderman, remember that name, told her to try the orchard. They told her that's where Flo had been headed earlier. With this news, Clara started her march across the wide lawn, which ended in a playing field rimmed with woods where began the orchard path. During these moments, stupid Charles still stewed behind the steering wheel, his great engine chugging. But he did not then pull down his goggles and drive away from campus. Instead, he watched Clara, watched disbelieving each step she took away from him and toward the tree line. And then she disappeared completely into the dark mouth that was the path's entrance. This is where the onlooking classmates begin to differ in their accounts. Some later insisted that Clara knew her knuckle-dragging cousin had left the car to chase after her. Those students claimed that she'd started to run even before she reached the woods, seeing or sensing Charles coming fast behind. Others said she didn't know, hadn't seen, and Clara herself could never say again. I'll stop there, but that is a little bit from the very, very beginning of the book, and obviously things don't look good for Clara Broward.
As you were reading, all these yellow jackets started appearing in the chat, and I'm getting so freaked out. Oh my God. It's like the book is coming to life. So the thing that's also so weird about these kinds of, readings like this, weird and wonderful, is that when you're the other person on screen, it's like you're having a private reading. And I'm really enjoying that aspect. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Emily Danforth is reading me this extremely creepy goodnight story.
Well, I was happy to do it.
Thank you. That was beautiful. So I have so many things to ask you and talk to you about, but one of the things I want to start with is this, just like about the process of writing. You were just saying it took you a minute. You weren't sure. It's a really deliciously long book. I want people to write more long books because I need them, especially long queer books. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about spending the time writing this second novel, or I don't know if it's your second novel, but second published novel, and coming out, with this book after. You said a minute. It didn't seem that long to me, but yeah. So I just wanted to talk about that time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Cameron Post was published as a YA novel, and it's not true for every YA author, but largely it seems a prolific bunch, right? And so it felt like a really long time to me because I was seeing all these folks who published, all these writers that published the year that I did, having 2 or 3 books out, right? Great books, really good books. Yeah. And I mean, several, it's not one other, but I was in a group of writers that published their first novels in 2012. And a lot of them, have had a couple more by now. So I think part of it was that. Part of it was my own insecurity about well, what do you write now? And I think I knew from when I was really young, before I could probably even tell you I would be a writer, that I would probably write a coming of age novel. If I was ever going to write a novel, it would be a coming of age novel. If it had some sort of sense of that, that's all I read. That's what I loved. And then my joke about Cameron is that it was a coming of age novel. And then for a while, that's all I read of those. Right. And I didn't have the kind of terrain as a writer to think about what the next book would be. And when I did, it was a really small terrain. So I had this idea that I wanted to write completely contemporary set story of the making of a found footage horror film at a supposedly cursed location. Because I don't know, we haven't talked yet. We were talking a little bit at the beginning, but about if you're a horror fan, but this is taken up in the book, but one of the things that will get me to watch the worst horror movie is when somebody tells me, oh yeah, that set was haunted, that production was cursed, right? And that's often used as a marketing strategy. I get that. It's often complete like crap. It's not true at all. But I love the lore around like the haunted horror production. And so that's really what I wanted to do. I was like, they're going to be making a movie. It's going to be at a cursed location and it's supposedly going to be cursed. Right. And I had all these films like Poltergeist and The Exorcist and The Omen, like to sort of like draw from. And that was it. And it was just going to follow the contemporary characters. And because I write slow and I write really long, I got several hundred pages into that version of the novel and hadn't answered for myself why the boarding school, the abandoned boarding school, was cursed. Like I didn't know why it was abandoned. Like that's a cool, spooky location. And, you know, maybe you can find them, but I didn't know. And in trying to answer that question, I did all this research into sort of, you know, turn of the century women's colleges and romantic friendships. And then I kept trying to like stuff that stuff into the novel in ways that did not work at all. So I had diary entries at one point. I had sort of letters between characters. You know, I had all these sorts of like I had reproduced these letters of like one of the students writing home to her father and he was answering back. And it just, none of it worked. Like it didn't make sense. And I finally kind of had to like give myself permission to write the historic portion in scene and put those, you know, actually like give life to the characters that I was imagining. And that was a total reconception, you know, like I didn't know what that book was. And so the whole way, I don't know if you write this way, but for me, the whole way of writing this book was like writing myself into a dead end and then backtracking and sort of writing myself into another one, like writing into a trap door and then, you know, writing into a nest of yellow jackets until I sort of, you know, figured out like how the two sections were going to comment on each other. And part of that was finding the narrator, figuring out who the narrator was going to be and kind of letting the narrator take me by the hand a little bit. So yeah. So I don't know if that like quite answers your question, but it was like a years long process. Cause I don't know if you're a nerd for research, but I am a total nerd for research and I would just be happy. Yeah. Just like be happy to just do that and then pick up all those little bits and put them in the book. And, yeah, I think that's like a writer problem, right? Like never get to writing because you're just like
constant research.
Did you know this fact about Mary McLean? She's the best, you know.
But I think that's one thing that's so exciting about, you know, I mean, when you're writing any kind of historical fiction or when you're taking so long to write a novel that it turns into historical fiction, which is what happened to me, that the research can be such an alibi. You know, I think it's really pleasurable. I love it so much.
Nice.
But I also love, like, that's one of the things I really appreciate about both the sort of like sections in the past and then the sections in the like really like the present, so contemporary, is that they both feel really thick with detail. And so it feels like there's research, there's sort of historical research, there's all this archival research that's clearly done to write the sort of like more historical fiction. But the sections that are, you know, in the present of this book, for me, they have a different kind of research, like that sort of like the research of the present. That's so like they're scenes and settings that you know so well, obviously. And it comes out, you know, in these like really sly details and like the sense of humor about LA and Hollywood, for instance, is really pleasurable. You sort of feel like, oh, maybe there's a little bit of a Romana Clay here as a writer who had their book adapted into an amazing movie. And when does that, you know, that was such a thrilling thing too. But to sort of feel like, oh, okay, there's been deep research and then there's deep knowledge of this other thing, but it's also fiction. Like when I read a book like that, I feel like I'm in such good hands and it allows me to just like kind of sink in to the point, you know, I didn't actually know that, that the book, Mary, oh God, I lost her name, Mary McLean's book. Yeah. I didn't realize until after I finished the book that it was real. Yeah, I was just like, Emily Danforth is just a fucking genius. And like her fiction writing is so, you know, such a baller that I believed that this made up book was real. And then I was like, wait, I'm sorry, what?
Because her story is so, thank you. Her story is so great that it should, I mean, it really, like, someone just needs to do the screenplay at some point of her life. And you're definitely not the first reader that has said this. I was doing a podcast and the interviewer was like, I went to her Wikipedia page, but I wasn't convinced because the book is so meta that you didn't just make her Wikipedia page. And I'm like, I was like, I don't have those resources, like I wish that would be a great kind of like, I wish I had to, that I could kind of invent that. But I'm so like, I said like during this process early on, I was like, if nothing else, if this book does nothing else than like introduce folks to Mary MacLane who don't know her, like that will be more than enough for me because she's so criminally underknown. I mean, there are certainly like researchers and historians and academics that have claimed her and taken her up. I was just emailing with a guy this morning that's been sort of like doing archival research into her since the 70s, but she just really isn't known given what a big deal she once was. And just like for folks listening that don't know it. So bisexual 19-year-old writer from Butte, Montana, who really did sort of sit down to write a memoir in 1902, right? It came out in 1902, so 1901, to write a memoir about her life. She called it Her Portrayal, with, the goal really of not just chronicling and being really sort of, descriptive and also like analytical about her life and herself and her sort of station, but also really with the express goal that she states in the memoir of lifting herself into literary superstardom. I mean, she says, I want fame, right? And she writes this thing and then gets exactly what she wanted. 80,000 copies sold in the first month, cocktails named after her, cigars named after her, a brand of Tabasco I learned this week named after her, sent on this sort of, literary tour. She wrote for all these magazines, hounded by the press, and really largely mocked and sort of, her work was sort of scorned. And so that was like another really interesting thing for me too, learning about her, because I learned about her, the first time I learned about her, it was as this sensation. And that's kind of what I knew. And I did not know how much I would enjoy the book, right? Like you can hear about somebody and it's sort of the lore of the person. And I had no idea like what a pleasurable read the book would be and how fresh it would feel and just how present, so I can't recommend it enough. And I certainly didn't make her up, but yeah, I think like it's, I'm thrilled that people are discovering her. She deserves every bit of that re-recognition, and so one of the premises of the novel is that these teen girls sort of form fan clubs in her honor, and that absolutely happened too. There were several examples of it happening across the U.S., but one in particular, a young woman in Chicago got arrested for stealing a horse. And when she was brought before the judge, she'd never done anything like this. The judge was like, why did you steal this horse? She was like, well, I wanted something to write about, like Mary MacLane. And the judge was like scandalized. And then she went on to tell, and there was sort of a newspaper article about like that she and some friends were meeting in secret. I can't remember the name of their club, but it had this great name to essentially, do mischief, because Mary MacLane had inspired them to. So yeah, I mean, I'm not as, it's not my imagination. It was all happening.
I love it. And I also love it. It feels that very sort of like queer intertextuality. It feels very much like that Dorian Gray, The Boy Who Was Ruined by a Book, the Heisman's book, right? Yeah, and I was thinking about that queer horror and those antecedents and that lineage, those ancestors. But also I was thinking, I saw this story that you talked a little bit about. I wonder if you could say more about it, because it has to do with research in a way, and maybe also your sort of like stake in telling these kinds of stories is there's a kind of a terrible but also really fascinating story about you had a great aunt. My great aunt Maud, on my mom's side, gay name.
It's such a good gay name. And who I just never knew because I was too young. And so I knew her as sort of, an old lady that I saw a couple of times, at family reunions. And she had big glasses and great sort of silver curls, and probably had a cardigan on. And then as I got a little bit older, I remember, and great aunt Maud passed away, I remember hearing these great stories about, her like house. She had a townhouse in Georgetown, and you know, like how eccentric she was, and that she had all these cats. Right? Like, I mean, all these things coded lesbian, but you know, that like at 14, I was like, now what did she do? And you know, I mean, one of the like famous family stories was that if like a child visited. And they had a game, she would like, or a toy, a favorite toy, she would steal the toy. And then it would be time to go. And the child would be like, where's my favorite set of blocks? And she'd be like, I have no idea. Right. And then when they were cleaning out her house, they found like all these toys and even found like some correspondence. So the family legend goes with like people writing and saying, did you see, you know, Jimmy's set of blocks? And she's like, no, I have no idea. Right. So it could have just been that she didn't know. And there were sort of these great stories too about these parties she would throw and not be ready for. But when some relatives, who I'm not particularly close with now, were cleaning out her house, they came across, and because she didn't throw anything away, a stack of letters that she'd received from, I mean, at least one woman, but I think there were several women. And it was very clear in those letters that they were having, you know, some sort of a romantic relationship, sexual relationship. And she'd saved them. And, you know, I had an aunt that made the decision that those letters should be destroyed. And I only found this out, like, as I was coming out, the year that I was coming out to my cousin, my aunt's child, you know, who sort of, you know, was like, well, you know, great Aunt Maud was gay. And I was like, no, I had no idea. And then she kind of spilled the beans on what had happened. So, yeah, I mean, it's always been this, I think like, so, right. Like so many families probably have a kind of story like this, but it's always felt like such a loss to not have those. And I think about what they would have meant, you know, I think about like kind of those aunt and uncle distributing her things, and everybody sort of got things, and like what it would have meant just that somebody had kept those. So yeah, there was, that kind of like reclamation of history and writing back into history, things that have been purposefully erased or coded, was certainly a part of this, right? That I was going to have my queer women of the past be very queer and not at all coded on the page. So,
yeah, that was such a deep pleasure for me. Before, you know, when we were just talking a little bit before this started, I was sort of like admitting that I will watch anything with queer content, and I will binge watch anything with queer content. But one of the things I was thinking a lot about is that for me, I really will only read historical fiction with queer or trans content. Like it's like the only thing I'm interested in. I mean, that's probably not totally true, but it's like, it really, if it's queer or trans historical fiction, I'm there. I want to read it. And there's something about that project, but for me also the toggling between the present and the past, and that kind of through line, and sort of feeling like how contemporary those teenagers and those teachers felt in the historical sections, and then kind of like comparing them with the people in the present day sections was also really just super fun for me. And one of the things I guess I wanted to ask about was maybe, you know, because there's young people in both sections of the new book, and there's certainly lots of young people in Cameron Post. And I wonder if you could talk about what having a book that's sort of like under the sign of adult literary fiction lets you do differently than having a book that's under the sign of YA, or if there's a difference, but like what does that marking let you do or keep you from doing?
I think there's like a lot less of a difference than I would have maybe said 8 years ago, even, or that I would have sensed that, because I see people doing all kinds of things in YA that I'm not, you know, that I think like, well, that's an umbrella for like reaching an audience, or an umbrella for sort of selling. It doesn't tell me much like as a genre, right, or as a category. There's books like that. It just feels like there's so much under that. But I think for sure, like one thing that I don't know that I could have done was follow. So we follow some of the students at Brocan's, but then we follow, right, the two women that are running the boarding school and those characters. And I think there are some examples of YA novels that do kind of have an adult POV, or we get sort of in the headspace of an adult character. They're not just like the friend's parents that we see in one scene, but it's definitely not as common.
Right.
And I don't know that it has as much to do at all with like, anything else about like the language of the book, or like, you know, but I think it's more just kind of like wanting to give the page over to Libby and Alex, who are the women that run the boarding school, and get some of their story. And that kind of like these women in their 30s would not really be the domain of YA.
That really makes sense. Yeah, because I was thinking about like, like Cameron Post, it was a book that I would not necessarily have, if it hadn't been marked as YA, I wouldn't necessarily have thought it was YA. I mean, I love that it is. And I love that young people have access to that book because it's sort of like shelved there.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah. I know that readers have found it that like wouldn't have otherwise. Right. Which is really exciting.
Which is really exciting. One of the things I was thinking a lot about, I read a couple of reviews. It's been great to see the attention this book is getting also. Really thrilling too, because, one of the things that people are talking about in the reviews that I wonder how you feel about, but people have been talking about how queer the book is and how it's like all the protagonists are queer and, or like all the main characters are queer. And I'm thinking to myself, like, God, I didn't notice that. Isn't that just life? Right? Like, I only know queer people, so like how you know what I mean?
This has been my reaction a few times. Yeah, like the people are like, was it an intentional sort of project? And I'm like, no, it just felt like the people that I know would end up in the book. So, I mean, I think like at one point, like I'm sure I probably realized, right? But yeah, it has been sort of surprising, and I guess like that maybe that itself is a statement that to other readers it does still feel kind of like, well, we haven't seen this, It absolutely feels like life. That my life is also populated with queer folks. So
and why isn't that just like why aren't there just like hundreds of I mean it seemed like both sort of like, oh right, yeah, that's why I love that. And then also like it's maybe that's a commentary on there's not as much. People are also mentioning something which I thought was a strange thing to mention was how fun the book was. And I mean that was also my response. I was like, oh thank God. Like, please, I just need to read something fun. This fucking quarantine.
Oh my God.
I mean, and when I was reading this, I was really, going through a lot of stuff, like family stuff. And I was just like, I need to go somewhere else and I need to have fun. But it's not like, I don't know. What's wrong with fun?
No, I don't think anything. And I wanted people to think the book was fun. I don't know if like some of it is maybe that they like, I think maybe like people hear it's a horror story and and I'm not sure. I think it's gothic. I haven't really claimed, I don't think it counts as horror, but I do think it's gothic. So I don't know if it's that like they hear some of the components and maybe it's like an assumption that it won't be right. Or that, they have a sense of like queer books somehow being more serious. I don't know, but I mean, mostly my reaction to that has just been like happy. I'm delighted that people are finding it fun. I hope that it feels like the kind of book that you sink into and sort of escape into and lose a couple of hours. That's exactly
many hours, a lot of sleep.
I mean, it's a big book.
I mean, maybe it also has something to do with Cameron Post being I wouldn't necessarily say like, oh, there's a fun book. I would say there's an incredibly moving book. And a surprisingly dirty at times book, and and like welcomely so, and then also like a like a profound book, but maybe people have a sort of sense like, oh, you can only do one thing, like you have to write something significant, and everything has to be like really, let's delve into queer pain, and then this is just like a lot of like really gothic lesbian fun.
Good, thank you. Yeah, it's just twisty and turny and nested.
I mean, not that there's not death.
There is death, yes, but somebody said like it's somebody called it like an amusement park of gothic delights. I was like that. Yeah, yes, that seems right. Like it's, and somebody else said like it was joyful horror. I've liked both of them. Yeah, I think that like if you get behind those things, is that I think some of it probably does have to do with like a sense of who I am as a writer from Cam Post and like then like the next kind of work that I would produce. And I guess like if I worry about something, I don't know like if it's like a worry, but I do know what Cam has meant to readers. I like hear from readers still, like I call it, and maybe you get these too, I call it like the 3 a.m. email. I'll look at the timestamp and I know somebody's just finished the book or is thinking about the book, and that's when they send the email, which usually has very little to do with the book and a lot to do with whatever they're thinking about, right? And I still get those, which is amazing because like there's more and better gay YA than ever, LGBTQ YA than ever. And so, but I wonder, like, I do worry a little bit that like, it is such a different book. Not that I don't think like some readers will think it's the same, but it's just so not Cam Post 2, totally. And I'm sure, I know some people I'm sure want that. And I couldn't give it in this, like, it wasn't the book I wanted to write, so this that. But I don't know that I worry, but it is a thing I think about. I'm like, this is not Cam Post 2.
Which I think, I mean, to me, that's such a strength. And it also, like, I feel like now it's just like, wow, everything is wide open. Like, you can do anything.
Yes.
You know, which is really thrilling.
Yeah. It sometimes feels, I mean, to me, daunting. Like, I can do anything like that.
Sorry.
There's an opportunity. Well, you too, right? Like, you can do anything and it might work. But then
someday.
also, you know, that those doors have been thrown open and it's not like the coming out experience or this sort of like wrestling with identity experience is not the fulcrum around which the plot has to spin.
Yeah, that's really, you know, I want to just put out there, because I don't want to totally bogart this discussion, that if anybody's got questions, anybody out there in invisible internet land, I think you can ask a question, and then I guess what happens is I read it. So I just put that out there, that you should ask questions if you have them. Yes, otherwise, please. I will continue to bogart because I have lots of things I want to know about. One of the things that I was wondering about is if, well, I mean, I know, you know, you were talking about graduate school at one point, and I think I have a sense that there's you're interested in metafiction, and you're interested in like the sort of like the book within the book and the horror movie within the horror movie, and that sort of like those are maybe some obsessions or fetishes you have in terms of writing. And I wonder about that. I always think like, oh, that's a sign, like metafiction, like that orientation feels like you're like writing as a reader. And I wonder if you would talk about that. Like, I wonder, is there like a stealth reading list? I mean, there's a very obvious reading list in your book, you know, the Mary McLean book, but is there like a stealth reading list?
Well, I don't think, no, that's super interesting. Like, maybe this kind of answers the question. Like, I think people are a little bit surprised sometimes. I think if, like, again, you associate like meta-ness, or you have some sort of like definition of postmodern lit, or you have some other sense of like textual play, that you like some of the stuff that I feel like I encounter as meta, maybe other readers don't. And so I even think that like there are aspects of like Mary McLean's diary herself, like if we're saying sort of stealth, that I think feel very meta, in that like she announces again like what the project is, right? Like that she's trying to like write this thing, this portrayal, and that she has these goals for it, and she's like stepping outside the text to comment on the text a little bit, right? But it doesn't sort of like adhere to, I feel like, a lit class definition of meta, right? And I think like the same thing with I've mentioned this, but like the ghost stories of Henry James and Edith Wharton, the same sort of thing, right? Like there's like such pleasure taken in this sort of like you know, let's gather and I'm going to tell you a scary story. And this is our purpose. Or like, that's the setup for a bunch of things, like the turn the screw, but several of Edith Wharton's. It's like, we were all gathered in the drawing room and we were put in the mood for a frightening tale. And I love that kind of like, hey reader, come gather with us. And now I'm going to like lay out for you what we're going to do. And so that both like sort of, I think like tingles that thing you were talking about that I love, that feels sort of meta and feels like I guess me as a reader, but it also, I think, just like it draws back to my childhood and one of the reasons I love horror in the first place, which is just, you know, and I hadn't really thought about this until I started trying to talk about like, well, why did you write this book? But you know, like horror folks, I think in particular, like are just like queers, love to talk about their root. And like everybody's like, oh, it's Stephen King, right? And I don't have that. That's not mine. It might be like The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the Disney version from the 40s, which I watched. My dad has a very creepy song. Like Bing Crosby singing this very creepy song about the Headless Horseman. But another thing was just that I remember like asking adults, usually adults, not my friends, to tell me like a scary story from their life, you know? And I remember kind of like being in groups with adults and being like, just like assuming, you know, that they would have one, and everybody did. And like, it felt like they often kind of took a lot of pleasure in, right? Oh, I'll tell you about a time that I was traveling and right. And that was the thing I did a lot as a kid. So I don't know, there's always been, I think, something in me that's kind of like likes that sense of like safe scared, right? Like, which is one of the reasons I like horror, that like we can close the book and it's done, and or we're gathered and we know the purpose is to tell the creepy story, but then we can turn the lights back on and go about our business. So yeah, everything I write, and I don't know I think every writer is built of all these obsessions that I never feel like I can unpack until the thing is done.
Totally.
In any kind of cogent way. Yeah.
That totally makes sense. That's
But
so interesting.
where did you when you were writing Paul? Like I have the same question. Like when did you set out, because that book has so much play, I think, like in terms of like where we follow the character. Like now we're in the Hansel and Gretel section. Now we're, it's obviously it's a shape-shifting novel, but I think just in terms of like the forms you allowed the text to take, did you know that's what the book was going to look like? Did you know that, like, okay, now we'll have, I
had no idea what I was doing. I mean, it was absolutely, I had no clue what I was doing. It took me a very long time to, follow the whole thing till its conclusion. If I had my druthers, I'd still be, tweaking sentences as we speak. I mean, I'm glad I stopped. I think it's good to finally stop. But I also think, like, to the extent that the book is, fairly playful or, I think in many ways unserious. I think, like, well, I am a fairly frivolous person and I don't have any problem. Like, I don't have a judgment of that. I think that's an okay thing. And it feels like very queer. But I think, like, I really appreciate playfulness in writing and in life. And I don't know. When I'm writing, I will say this, and I think that maybe you've touched on this a little bit, but I rarely have a lot of intention. I'm rarely trying to get a message across. Okay, no, I'm never trying to do that. Mm-hmm. Like, I have no intention. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just like listening to new wave really loud and seeing what happens. I have no idea. I probably hopped up on cappuccinos or CBD. And so, like, whatever happens, or both at the same time, sober speedball, I am just doing my thing. And whatever happens afterwards, the meaning is made in the editing suite, I think.
Okay.
There are a number of questions, and I want to ask some of them to you.
Okay.
For these other people. This is a question. I'm just going to do this one because it's sort of related. And it actually starts out sort of related. Can you recommend some horror movies?
Yes.
For Halloween week? It says for Halloween week reading. So I am also going to say, can you recommend any horror books? And then do you remember your first favorite horror book movie experience? Let's talk about horror genre.
Absolutely. So my first horror movie, I think, was The Fly. Maybe some people would say that doesn't count. That's sci-fi, right? But it certainly felt like it counted to me. And I was way too young to see it, like at a family reunion in Michigan, and the older kids were watching it, and they didn't sort of get me to leave the room. And I was really, really, really pretty traumatized by it. And also, like, another, well, I already said this, like another one, because I like Disney made some really, really scary stuff, and so they made for kids, like, it wasn't sort of like accidentally scary, and they made that cartoon I was telling you about that, like, was one of my dad's favorites when he was a kid. But they also made a movie called Watcher in the Woods, which you're gonna, like, probably some people would be like, that doesn't really count, but I'm telling you, find Watcher in the Woods with Bette Davis, made for children in the 1980s. It's very creepy. And it's definitely one of them. Somebody loves The Fly. See, I don't know that I've ever
love The Fly.
I don't know that I've ever gone back. I probably would love it now, but I can still feel this kind of like, what, do you have one? Do you have like a first horror movie that you?
I'm not really a horror fan. I had a girlfriend in, like, I love Gothic. I mean, Rebecca, so creepy. The first Rebecca film, really wonderful to me. But anything that's got a little queerness and a little horror, I'm into. I mean, The Hunger,
of course.
I mean, right? I'm gonna just only answer in gay.
Susan Sarandon in that T-shirt. Come on now.
Come on now. But the books for me maybe were more resonant, because I'll actually, like, I love, like, thinking about Patricia Highsmith. I like just devoured the Ripley books, which feel really related. I feel like they're, part of, like, there's something in Plain Bad Heroines that does ring a little bit of a Highsmith bell for me. But, like, Jewel Gomez is the Gilda stories.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff like that. Really, those were early.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, like, every horror fan, and queer probably, I love Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. Like, how can you not? And if you've, like, heard about that, like, 'cause sometimes people be like, oh, like, I've heard about that one, or you watch the Netflix series, which is great, but you just haven't, like, picked up the book. Like, I'm telling you, like, the best thing you can do for your Halloween is pick up The Haunting of Hill House.
And you can order it right there when you order Plain Bad Heroines, right there.
Grab it.
That green bar.
And then so that's like definitely one. God, there's been so many. There's a reissue. So probably you've read Carmen Maria Machado's, right?
Great. Oh my God.
Yeah. So Her Body and Other Parties, which is fantastic. But then also she did like an edited version of Carmilla.
The introduction to that is like one of the best things I've ever read.
It's what I'm saying. It's so good. So if you've never read it and you're like, oh, right, the original lesbian vampire tale, this is the edition to read.
God.
Like this is the one that's going to situate it in the way that you want it. And like in terms of some horror movies, recent horror movies that you might check out, if you haven't seen Thelma, some people really don't like Thelma, but Thelma is very sapphic. It's sort of like a sapphic Carrie. It's a student from an ultra-religious background who starts having these kind of episodes at college. And it's really sort of visually stunning, and it's pretty easy to find. I think it's from 2017. So that's a film called Thelma, and very, very, I thought, very, very scary. And then there's like so many remakes on like Carmilla, but one that I really love is this very indie film. Again, controversial ending. People seem to not like the ending, but it's called Sweet, Sweet Lonely Girl. And it has Quinn Shepard, who was actually in the Cam Post movie. And it's
a great title.
It's really good. And it's just so gothic. It's playing on every gothic trope. It's sort of like I think it maybe is set in the, I think maybe it's like set in the 80s. It feels very 70s horror, though. That's the look it has. And it's a woman who's sent to take care of her aunt in this big old Victorian house. And then sort of like this, this sort of charming stranger comes into her life, and they have this kind of romance and some other things go on. So it feels very Carmilla. You'll see all of the kind of, it's not a vampire story, but it is kind of a dangerous attraction story. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
I would love to just talk, that Portlandia skit where they're like, did you read this? Read it. Did you read this? Read it. Like, I just want to do that with you all night. But there's all these other questions, including one from a former student of mine. And I want to read this one. Hi, Mia here. Hey, Mia, what's up? Would love to know more about how you decided which bits of your research to bring to the forefront in your book and which you just wanted to have in the back of your mind as you wrote. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't, I think it was like a lot of trial and error. And I think, again, because I had done so much, that sometimes it was putting something in a scene and then realizing like I didn't really need it. Part of it was that figuring out process was when I was trying to figure out if I was even going to have the historic sections be in scene, or if I was going to try to include that information somewhere else. Because initially when I was doing that research, like I said, it was really just to answer the questions for myself. And then it became a whole half of the book, but I don't have a prescriptive answer for that. I mean, I think sometimes I would try something and then realize we don't need this element. But the book also sort of revels into its too muchness. Like it knows that it's too much. It's sort of playfully too much. So I probably erred on the side of keeping it in if it was delightful to me.
Yeah. I love that answer so much.
Good.
I also love too muchness. There's a book I really love, a new book that just came out called You Exist Too Much. And the book is amazing. Okay. And then the title is so great, right?
Yeah.
Also
really
very queer. This is another question that feels related because it's also about this sort of the question of historical. Well, there's a couple of questions about this sort of blending of historical and contemporary. So one of the questions is, can you talk about how you shaped the contemporary voices? And this is the key. And I think this is really interesting. Trends in humor and language move so fast, and this feels so of the moment. How much did you edit it to keep it so contemporary?
How much did I edit it to keep it so? I don't. I think that I edit as I write, which is part of the reason that it takes me so long. So you were saying you kind of like write loud with the music on, get it all down, and you don't really know what you're doing, and then it's the edit. But
so much editing, just constant editing.
I go over a line and over a line and over a line sort of as I'm going, which is again I think it slows me down. It's really not the way to do it. So like I write a lot at the dining room table, and I live with my wife and my mom, and they'll kind of, they've gotten a little bit used to it, but maybe you do this too. I will be reading aloud the conversations and just doing it over and over and over again. So one character saying something and the other character saying it back, and one character saying something, the other character, you know, and trying to kind of like, does that ring right? And then one of my favorite things to do, it's like a reward, you know, the nerdy things that writers do, is sort of get to the end of a writing day and then go back to a section that I thought was like kind of strong and do that again, right? And so be like, I was feeling pretty happy with that. Like, how do I feel about it now? And it like feels like a, you know, sometimes you get there and you're like, oh, this isn't this is not as much fun as I thought it was.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, so that really is how I write, and it's really it feels kind of painstaking. I won't kind of like put it to bed. I can't. And I know the advice of like sort of leave off in a place where you're ready to get started. But I spend so much of when I sit down to write something, like when I'm in the act of composing a scene or a chapter, I spend so much of my time going over the pages that I wrote the day before. It's not just kind of like, well, I'll read these two, right? Like, it's like, well, I should start back 5 pages before that, right? I should probably start back here.
Oh no, that's what I always think of. I think I write, I mean, I kind of like draft in a little bit of a frenzy or something, but the rest of the process, which apparently takes me 15 years, is like a laser. I mean, it's like a inkjet printer. I just do a pass and then another pass and then another pass. I mean, I will start at the beginning. I will start on page 1 every time if somebody does not forcibly stop me.
Nice. Yeah.
No, it's terrible. But what I would say is, you're saying it's not like what you do is not the way to do it, but clearly it is the way to do it, and the proof is in the pudding.
It's a way to do it. It's a way to do it.
Right, exactly. There's not a right.
Whatever gets the words on the page is the way to do it. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So the thing that's also, I just want to come back to that question, because the question of how do you keep something contemporary when it's getting like just this sort of, you know, a fair amount of, like, there's a fair amount of the story that's set in the present day that actually, you know, has to do with Instagram, for instance, and like celebrity lesbians. Celesbians. I've never said that word out loud. It's fun. Celesbians.
I feel like a cannon should go off or something.
No, I know. I feel like I should have
gay confetti.
I should have more reaction possibilities on this. But confetti cannon. But I just wonder, like, how do you, you know, what were you thinking about that?
About
like, how was it? Were you nervous at all? Like, I'm gonna write this and then, like, you know,
people won't understand. People will miss sort of that.
Yeah.
Like, they won't. Yeah. I mean, I think that like there are all kinds of things. It's not just, I think, in the contemporary section. I feel like there are all sorts of things that like maybe in the novel that like are risk a little bit like being misunderstood or like somebody kind of skipping over it. But I don't know. Like, I think even if you're not on Instagram, it feels to me like people are so kind of online that it just, you might not know the exact term, but I just didn't worry that much about, I guess, like people keeping up with it. I just didn't worry about it. Like I feel like that comes through, you know, because it's sort of like, this is just the world. Knowledge. Yeah. I assumed, and it felt like contextually you'll figure it out.
Totally.
Or the thing that like I do all the time when I'm reading books, which is like pull out my phone and be like, what, you know, usually like, what is this word I don't know, but like, what is this thing that I don't know? So if it matters that much, but yeah, I did not think about it that much. It just seemed to me like people will understand this. I do think like very possibly that it will become, you know, like in a decade, maybe like so kind of old technology that then it, you know, it won't.
Well, then it becomes interesting. No, but then it becomes, so it's like, for me, it's like, I'm starting to write, you know, what ends up being Paul in, I don't know, like 2003 or something, like 2003, maybe I started writing what turned out to be the beginning of Paul. And, you know, I was writing about events in my life that may or may not be thinly veiled, just, you know, autobiographical fiction represented in the book that happened, you know, like 5-10 years before. So it was sort of like contemporary-ish. By the time I finished a draft of it, my thesis director, Jed Berry, was like, wow, you got the historical fiction really down for the 90s. And I was like, Jed, the 90s, that's not historical fiction. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he was just like, actually it is now. So, you know, then that became interesting to me as a constraint, but there are also things I just hadn't really noticed that now I'm just like, oh, people are just like, wow, that's interesting that, you know, this whole thing happened with the answering machine. And I was like, yeah, no, I was just writing about life, and life included answering machines.
Life looked like this. Exactly.
And that would be a plot point because that was a part of life. And so I think it's sort of, you know, that to me seems very interesting to imagine that if Instagram, say, does not like last for the next 20 years. People will still be interested because it sheds a little window on it. Like
what were we doing?
What the hell was that?
Yeah. What? Yeah, exactly. No. Yeah. That's so interesting you say that about Paul, because I remember when Cam came out in 2012, I said in an interview, because Cam is also set in the 90s, right? Like I said in an interview, well, and it was just because that's when I was a teen in Montana. Right. I said, like, well, I kind of consider it historical fiction, and the person laughed. There was, they were like, ha, and I was like, no, I mean, I kind of think it is. Yeah. But I think it was like somebody my age, and I think it was just that kind of process of being like, oh yeah, wait a minute, like now, and especially because I was thinking about teens encountering it, right? And so like, how are they? How is a 14-year-old now like going to pick up this phone, book and go, what was that? I mean, I think Columbia House is referenced in it, right? Like you would order tapes.
Oh man, right?
Like, how do you explain that? Well, you would order them in your friend's name, and then they would have to pay for them, and they get shipped to your, like, it's like this weird, all the CDs you didn't want because they sent them to you for 99 cents, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. I know, that was so, I really remember that. There's another question that's like really different from anything else anybody's asked, and I actually want to talk about it, or I want you to talk about it, which is, can you talk a little bit about the decision to include illustrations, and what was it like to collaborate with an artist on those?
It was so great. Sarah Lautman did the illustrations. She's the best. Look her up. And she had contacted me at some point when I wasn't getting much work done on this book, some point between Cam coming out and, a couple years ago, and just said, hey, I'm a fan of Cam Post, and if you ever want to work on something together, here's some of my stuff. And what she meant, I think she might even said specifically, if you want to work like on an essay or a short story, right? Like we could do that together. And I said to her, I was like, I think I was going up for tenure that year. Maybe I was teaching. It was a bad time. And I said, I'm not really working on anything. But like,
I love that answer, by the way. Love that answer.
Yeah. I mean, I'm teaching, I am working, but I'm not writing a thing. But like maybe if you'll just hang tight. And then when I really started getting going on this book, when I gave myself permission to write the historic half, I was like, this is the thing that should be illustrated. Like, the Victorian illustrated novel, the illustrated boarding school novel. I was like, of course this should be, right? And so I wrote her, but I was like, hey, I have a much bigger proposition for you. And Sarah was so game from the jump. And the coolest thing, because I've never collaborated, with anybody on anything, another writer, but certainly not an illustrator. The coolest thing is she was illustrating, and we had started this process before I'd sold the book, before I was done with the book. And so Sarah's way of seeing these characters and kind of like us talking about what was going on really formed some parts of the book. And I think like most Gothic lit, a lot of the book is about like acts of looking, acts of lurking, acts of voyeurism, who's seeing what and who knows who's seeing what. So it just felt like, in addition to having like this historic component that really felt like it made sense for the book, that yes, it be illustrated because it's so much about the book as object. Yeah. It also made sense that like Sarah's way of seeing these characters was one more way of looking at them, right? It was one more sort of act of that. And it was so fun. It was really, really such a delight. I loved doing it. And there were things that we really nerded out about. Like we really wanted the map. And Sarah was like, I'm not a cartographer. And I'm like, no, I know. So it was like, that was a real challenge for her. And I know she had to really stretch herself to figure out like how to do that map at the beginning, but we really wanted the map. And I love seeing like where that map started, which was these tiny kind of like stick figure trees, to like where it ended up. And there were just some things that she saw in a particular way that were really surprising to me about, oh, this is how this person is interpreting the world. And it sort of taught me something else about Brookhant. So I loved it. And now all I want to do is collaborate. And I had this like notion of like, I'm a novelist and I write in solitary, and I feel really like opened up by the experience. So
yeah, I love the illustrations too. I was glad somebody asked about that. I wonder if we're running out of time. But I got to ask this. There's so many good questions. Maybe I'll email them to you to ask for later. But one of them was, did you have any specific lesbian muses? See, I had to ask this question because it's meta. Do you have any qualifications for who makes the cut as a lesbian over time? No, I want to talk about this. Let's talk about lesbians, please.
Okay, please. But do I have any I'm setting the bar? And
I mean, who's a lesbian? Okay, who are your do you have lesbian muses? while writing this? Are there any lesbian muses now? Let's talk about lesbians.
Lesbians. So
I just said that word like 10 times.
You've said it a million times,
I know,
I think. You were like, well, we cracked it open, so I'm going to say it.
I know.
So I think for me, Sarah Paulson counts as a lesbian for sure. Like, I think she is my barometer of lesbianness. And you would perhaps agree.
I do.
You're like, absolutely. I think... Like, I mean, she is like the one that like occurs to me the most. I am not going to say who this person was, but I'm really not going to say it, but people are very much more savvy online than I am. There's a certain Instagram sort of like influencer model who I sometimes kind of had in mind for Harper's look. And that was like one of my ideas of like a lesbian influencer anyway. Like if we were going to tag the two people together, but I'm not going to name this person. Somebody will figure it out, I'm sure.
I hope they tell me.
And they'll tell you. Do you have like a lesbian? And somebody said Holland Taylor, and I think absolutely like that's a nice sort of lesbian couple for sure. Do you have a favorite lesbian?
I have a favorite lesbian. I don't know if it's going to be a crowd favorite. It's Adele Haenel from BPM, or 120 Beats Per Minute, the French movie about ACT UP. Yeah. And I think she might have been in another movie, was she in Portrait of...
Oh yeah, she was in Portrait.
But I haven't seen that yet because again, my girlfriend won't watch movies with queer content, so I have to. I'm using like a birthday like present on that, but I haven't claimed it yet. It is a deep cut. Thank you, Errol. I have a certain thing that I like. What can I say? Thank you, Trish Bendex. I really feel strongly about her. But I have a lot of feelings about lesbians, and I get like really interested and curious about, the lesbians that my students are following or talk about. I teach a queer and trans writing class.
So who are they? Yeah, like who are? But
I can't remember their names. I don't even know. Like it took students introduced me to the concept of Tegan and Sarah.
Oh yeah.
Not long ago.
For sure.
Now I'm showing my age here, but so I enjoy learning about this. But for me, it's more. I think I have more age appropriate interest. Like the Sarah Paulson feels very compelling to me just as a person.
I heard somebody say Cara Delevingne as Harper, and several people have said that to me. That was not who was in that. That wasn't like in my head, but several people have said that already. So I feel like there's something to that. Other people are noting that would be their lesbian pick.
I'm sure that people are talking to you about this nonstop, and maybe there's probably things you can't say, but I'm obsessed with the idea that this will become a movie that I can watch, or maybe that it would become like a limited series or like an unlimited forever series. So I could just be in this world for a really long time.
I don't have any info about that whatsoever.
But I mean, after going through the process of having a book adapted, is that something that you would be excited about or open to?
Absolutely. Completely. Yeah, I would be thrilled. And there definitely there has been some interest, but there is no sort of specific plan for that to happen. But yeah, I would be delighted. Of course, I would. I would love to watch this as a series and love to see what a filmmaker or showrunner would make of it. So yeah, I'd be very open to it. Completely.
That's awesome. There's more questions. Shoo, I gotta watch this. I love having this question thing. Here's this question, which is a question for us both. And it has the word worried in it, so I'm sure I'm going to have an answer to it. Were there things you were worried about when starting the publishing process for your books? Any advice for those looking to publish their work? Yeah. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, especially with my first book, I think I was worried that I would be asked to change things. And I had a great experience with my publisher, and really, I mean, of course I had to make edits like everyone, but it's not the specifically sort of sexual content, lesbian content, even for a YA book, the sort of drug use, I was not asked to remove or change those things. And I did have concern about that. I thought I'm just not sure that I'll get away with this.
I mean, it's sort of surprising because many people have been asked to change that stuff for YA, and especially around queer content. So it's amazing. I mean, I think if you leave, sometimes too, obviously, if that stuff is left in books, even if the publisher is okay with it, it certainly can affect getting picked up by certain libraries, right? Or put on certain lists, and it's
sometimes coded, they'll say it's about the other content or the language, right? But it is absolutely about the queer content in the book. So even if your publisher is behind you, it's not like it's an automatic pass. But
to have an editor or an agent or marketing people who are strong advocates for your work at that point seems also crucial.
And
unusual.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like also just like in terms of marketing, one thing I'm always worried about, and I think I've heard you speak to this in terms of Paul, is like you don't ever, and again, I hope publishers are getting better about this, but you don't ever want to be kind of marketed as the like, you know, like the representative like lesbian, right? Like here's the lesbian novel, you know, like you like always want to be really clear that like this is a lesbian novel, right?
One voice,
one
of a
voice
chorus in the conversation.
Yeah. That's doing these things, right? And so that's, I mean, I think that's like a thing that I'm always kind of thinking about, like in terms of like materials that are put out or how the book is being talked about.
Yeah, that makes sense. I had a thing I was worried about, like quite worried actually, that people were going to just be not interested in like gender or the 90s anymore. So, and that I guess apparently maybe wasn't the case. So that was, you know, I was pleasantly surprised to find that people were still wanting to hear about the 90s.
And I'm always worried about length. I mean, I still am, right?
Really?
Like, I've gotten away with it, and I'm glad you like.
It's a selling point to me.
Is it? Yeah, it is to me too. I want to like sink into books, but I know that like, you know, the doorstop comment, right?
The doorstop. When I get it, look at that. I mean, it's not like I'm not trying to be a side queen about it, but I feel really strongly that if there's a writer who I love and then they have a new book and it's fat, I just like went to heaven, you know, like I cannot even. Yeah. So that to me, I please never worry about that. I also love a novella.
Sure.
I'm omnivorous. I like minimalism too. I would say though, in terms of, you know, any advice for those looking to publish their work, do you have any advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like, you know, if you can, it sort of depends on where you are, right? Like, or like, do you have a whole draft? I mean, like all the like basic things apply, but maybe you haven't heard them. I think they're worth saying, like, get a lot of friends to read, right? People that you trust that are going to be honest with you about whatever it is you're writing kind of before you go to send it out. And you know, people that you trust that are going to like be honest with you, you know, that like the thing that you're doing is kind of in the shape that you want it to be. And then I think like there's so much more information than there once was about like how to find an agent, if that's the route you want to go, or like reputable contests to enter, or if you're looking specifically at like maybe trying to get a residency, you know, all these ways that you can kind of find connections into the publishing world. You know, you can start trying to make a name for yourself with smaller pieces and sort of, you know, I mean, it's just such a broad question. Like, are you trying to publish a novel, or are you trying, you know, because I think like there's different advice for all, but I don't know. It all starts with, I think, like reading a ton and writing a ton, which is like maybe the advice that nobody wants, but it seems like the truest advice for me. I mean, I've done all the sort of education that you can, I think, as a writer, as a creative writer. And I still think the thing that, and I had great professors and classmates, but I think the thing that's taught me most about writing novels for sure is reading novels. I mean, there's no question, like building up instincts and sort of intuiting how to do things. That's all come from just reading other people's work, you know, and trying to like figure out how they did it. So.
Yeah, I completely, you know, hard agree with all of that. And I do think that like, you know, I mean, I had a weird experience in terms of getting published of you know, trying to get, you know, go the traditional agent route. Basically, you know, I got a lot of people saying, can Paul learn a lesson? You know, can there be more conflict? You know, so I tried to amp up the 3-act structure, but ultimately I was like, nah, that's not this book. Yeah. Paul can't learn a lesson. Sorry. Like, no. Or not a lesson that you would recognize.
Paul can shapeshift a lesson, but
this is not going to, you know, happen. So then, you know, Rescue, they were so amazing, and I had like the best editor in the world, Hillary Plum, Rescue is just such an amazing press. Working with a small independent, you know, all they did was make the novel so much better. Hillary, as an editor, her instincts were fantastic. She pushed me in really good ways, but also, you know, I think like they never said, "Oh, this won't sell." They were just like, "We're a small independent press. We just want to make a book that looks beautiful and that is the book you want to make." So one thing I would say is, you know what book you want to make. And you know, write till you feel like you've got it as good as you can get it. And then when you feel really like, this is the book I want to put in the world with my name on it, then, you know, go out there and see what can happen. If you can find people at that point who will help you
what you're doing,
see what you're trying to do. And I think, you know, small presses are great for that. I mean, financially, it's a different story, but in terms of putting out the work, especially with queer work, sometimes small presses are the places, the people who will take a chance. And then like, for me, what happened is then I got some like really unexpected, again, review attention and some stuff like that. And then I actually got an agent after the book had been out, you know, for some time. And then, you know, he got it reprinted with Vintage, and that was really cool. But that wasn't, you know, the beginning of it. It was a longer process. And I think, you know, not compromising in order to like get an agent or a deal, especially with like a queer book or a trans book or a book that is like just weird.
Yeah.
And you want it to be weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how are we doing? I think we might be, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
I guess I have one more, there's one more question, and let's talk about it. It's a really kind of a juicy one. Thank you both so much for doing this. Thank you, Brian. This is a great question. Brian says, I would love to hear more from both of you about the politics and pleasures of writing queer historical fiction. And I'm really always excited to hear about people. I'm just chiming in here, writing about, you know, I'm excited to hear about people's pleasures.
Yeah.
Brian says, playing Bad Heroines sounds like it's playing a lot with the reader's desire to know the real or true history in a super interesting way. And then Brian nicely says, Paul is also so playful in terms of its presentation of 90s queer subcultures. So yeah, pleasures and historical fiction.
Yeah. I mean, I think like one thing, and I know we've heard you talk about this, like the notion of like the real or true way, I feel like Playing Bad Heroines like both revels in the time period a little bit and allows the characters to be very queer and kind of gives them, you know, like Mary McLean and like her role as like a way to visualize the young characters, what their queerness might look like, right? Or kind of like give language to it. But I hope that it resists kind of being like the one, like a sort of like presenting itself as like the one way to be queer at that time, right? Like that it like whatever it might look like, there's another character, even in the historic section, that's like expressing their sapphic life in a different way, you know, and that's come into it in a different way. And that was like, you know, I think like more conscious than the thing we were talking about earlier, which is like, did you realize all the characters were queer? I think I was conscious, particularly in the historic section, of like all of these women, yes, even in 1902, are like coming into and expressing that like sort of like sapphic identity in different ways, right? And like, and I think like you see that I tried to really sort of like mirror that in the relationship between the women that run the boarding school, Alex and Libby, and was really thinking about like, how did they get together? That's one of the reasons it was so important to me to show their sort of courtship story before, you know, we meet them when they're older, but then kind of show their like coming together. And that felt like both deeply intentional, but also sort of playful to me, right? That it wasn't just sort of one like we have one character, right? Or one portrait of like what it might've been like, to be queer at that time. I've heard you say about Paul, and I don't know if this like comes into this question for you, but I've heard you describe it as, you wanted to like really resist writing his origin story. Yeah. And I guess I was thinking a little bit about that too, in terms of like the trapdoors that you keep falling through in this novel. Like every time you think you've kind of come to the end of an answer, hopefully there's like another alley to follow down, right? And there's another alley, and you never get like a satisfying kind of like, and that's what caused, you know. And I think even when you do at the very, very end of the novel get like a reason that there's a curse, this is all obviously a lot of Gothic mischief, but the reason that there's a curse, you can't really trust the person that's giving you that reason that there's a curse. Yeah. So there's never like a side kind of like bow put on any of the material. And that feels deeply queer to me and was pretty intentional, that I was never going to like just solve this in a kind of satisfying way, that like, that's it, and we close the box on it.
I feel like that kind of resistance feels, it feels queer. It feels important. It feels like, for me, I just never wanted there to be an answer to like, why does Paul have, you know, these shape-shifting powers? I just wanted that to be, you know, there for people to do with what they would. And actually it was my editor, Hilary Plum, who said, you know, like I had some of these fairy tales in this sections in, and Hilary's like, why do you need them here? There either need to be more of them or fewer. And, you know, because I'm always going to say to everything, I'm always going to say more because I love excess. So I was like, okay, I can't say why I need them, but there have to be more. So then I tried to figure out why I needed them. And I realized that it was in the process of articulating to her why I needed them. I realized that it was because I needed to have like multiple sort of like contradictory, impossible origin stories. Like I hate that question. Yeah. You know, I had to sort of like come to, you know, my own sort of understanding that it was okay to hate the question of like, why are you queer? Why are you trans? Whatever. Any of those questions feel so not useful to me. They feel so not liberatory. And so I think, I don't know. I think I wanted to sort of, that was one of the few things I think that came together more intentionally was sort of saying like, I'm going to intersperse these, I'm going to add more of them, and I'm going to try to combat some of that, like those sort of easy answers. But the pleasures and, you know, the pleasures of writing queer historical fiction to me is just the pleasures of like, you know, queer across the curriculum, baby. You know, I want like queer in everything. I want like trans people everywhere. I want like everything, you know, that I read. I want to have that perspective because that's the perspective that feels like, you know, just very familiar and comfortable. And I like to read outside of my comfort zone, but I also, especially when I'm constantly shifting into other perspectives to get a sense of the past, say, I want to sometimes have that comfort of being like, yes, this is not my experience, right? But there are through lines. I can recognize that feeling of like, gaze into olden times.
And I think like that kind of that, like when you say pleasure, that ties to that thing we were talking about earlier with like great Aunt Maud. Like for me, there's just great pleasure in that, like knowing, right, how often we've been erased or sort of coded, and then kind of reveling in like the ways of putting us back on the page, right? Like and for me, it was like all the Gothic lit were like, probably some scholar told me at some point, right, well, this character could be coded queer, or I've just decided for myself that a character could be coded queer, and then really like just delighting and making that really explicit. So and thinking of like some of my favorite kind of Gothic moments or Gothic tropes and like inserting lesbians into them. That was the pleasure, you know, sort of
inserting or like excavating, right? Like,
excavating is definitely the better.
I mean, I feel like that thing you're just saying about like finding these things and then, you know, do you ever look back at things that you liked when you were younger, for instance, or like, I have this thing with actors where I'm just like, if I have a crush on an actor, you can guarantee that she's queer, like in real life. Like if I like, there's just something there. But do you ever look back and like all the things you liked when you were little turned out to have like that aspect to it?
Oh yeah.
Right. I think.
Yeah, it's all there. Yeah, it never sort of stops, right? Like from the haircuts to the Halloween costumes to the
We're getting some oh my god yeses in the chat, which I appreciate. It's nice to, and that's another pleasure I think of like queer writing is just that feeling of like, hey, it's us.
Yeah.
You know, like it feels like you're reading a book, but you're also, I mean, that's why I think this book for me was so pleasurable in a really painful part of quarantine was it was like, oh, thank God, you know, like I could not be happier to be like trapped with my partner and our delightful child. Right. Like there's nobody I'd rather be trapped with. And I was like, oh, thank God, huge parties full of queers. Like I need that so bad right now, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. We're all in our bubbles, our silos. Yeah. Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So there's that, and it's so nice to be with all these people that we can't see, but we feel you over here. And I think probably I'm not sure, but like, how are you doing? You've been talking for a long time.
Yeah, no, this has been really great. Yeah.
It's wonderful.
It's almost 9. Yeah. It was really wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. And thank you, Errol, for making this happen because, you know, it's also that thing. It's like, now I'm just like, God, I could just like, maybe I could get you to arrange for me to talk to anybody I want. If you get me to arrange for me to talk to Emily Danforth, like I think Adele Hanel could be next.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? Did she write a book?
I didn't know who she was until tonight, so
bloody.
I'm being educated, but
it's hurtful to me.
I know. Well, now I know. Okay, hey, look, we have a question in the chat though.
Oh yeah. There's a. Do you want me to read it? Is that easier for you? You're gonna read it.
No, I got it.
Okay, cool.
Oh, thank you First of all, it's a late, but we also need some time to figure. I'm sorry, I'm trying to. You probably like got a lot of my face. I'm realizing.
I know. I'm always finding myself like really in the
Christina,
thing.
thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. And I'm delighted that you found Cam when you needed that book. It takes me by surprise, I think, even to see these comments still. So eight years on. So I really appreciate it. There's like, I didn't expect this. I think most writers don't, like that I would, that you would hear from readers that that your work had this kind of impact on, and it's really meaningful. So thank you. And thanks for putting it in the comments. And thank you for attending tonight.
Yeah. Thank you to everybody for attending. It's been fun to read all of your comments. I hope that if it's your first time to a Charis event, you will come join us for more events.